What does it take to build a steam locomotive from scratch? Today on the Roundhouse, we are talking to some guys who are building one of the Pennsylvania Railroad's largest steam locomotives. All aboard!
In days past, the roundhouse was where the railroad worker united with the steam locomotive, each to prepare for the journey ahead. Today, it's where we examine the history, the industry, the machines, the hobby, and the passion behind railroading. News, interviews, stories, and more. So climb aboard. This is The Roundhouse.
Welcome to the Roundhouse. I'm your host, Nick Ozarek, and this is episode 112 of our Trains and Railroading podcast, where we're talking about everything in the industry and the hobby. You name it, and we discuss it. Today, we're talking to Jason Johnson, who's the general manager for the T1 Trust, which is building a Pennsylvania Railroad T1, a 4444 steam locomotive, from scratch. We take your questions regarding the history of the project so far, why they chose that specific locomotive, where they're at in the process of building it, and what it's going to take to complete it. Before we get to talk to Jason, though, I want to thank those of you who are supporting the Roundhouse on Patreon, including our new subscribers, Thomas Armistead and Patrick Bazinet, who's subscribed on behalf of his son Cedric. Thank you guys for joining the team. And if you like what we do at the podcast and you want to support the show, visit patreon.com/theroundhouse and you can support us for as little as $1 a month. I really appreciate the help. I also want to thank the Age of Steam Roundhouse for sponsoring today's episode. You can step back in time to see the culmination of Jerry Joe Jacobson's vision and explore his period-correct, accurately constructed brick roundhouse. For more information, visit their website at ageofsteamroundhouse.org. Our guest today is the general manager for the T1 Trust. Please welcome to the Roundhouse, Mr. Jason Johnson.
Yes, thanks for having me along, Nick.
I've been familiar with your name for well over a decade. We're going to deviate a little bit before we get to the T1 Trust stuff, because I first encountered your name when it came to Train Festival 2009, Train Festival 2011, and that's where I first encountered your name. Here we are, it's 10 years out from the last one, which was in Rock Island, Illinois, which was a massive gathering of steam and diesel locomotives from around the country. When you look back on this 10 years ago, what are the moments and what are the things that stand out for you?
Looking back a decade later, we were very lucky when it came to the time. A lot of things lined up for us in 2009, 10, and 11. The railroads were in a recession, so they had excess capacity so we could move stuff around the country easier at that time, and a lot more interest to that. So a lot of that was really the timing came down to it for us. So we lucked out.
What do you think it would take to recreate an event of that scale, or even a fraction of that scale?
You know, others have, used similar models and got stuff together. I mean, you just had the big gathering of smaller 3-foot gauge stuff out at Cumbres and Toltec. But as far as on a bigger scale, with having all the events go around like a true rail festival, World's Fair type event, it's difficult. I find it hard to see that happening again anytime in the future. I don't rule it out because railroads go through cycles. If you look back about 10 to 15 year cycles, management tends to be 3 to 5 year cycles in the railroads. So things change dramatically. And so basically, if you want something to change, I just tell people to wait and they'll change again. If you look at how many times mainline steam has popped up and died over the last 40 years, it's on like a 10-year cycle. So we're on the back end of one cycle, and I think that with some of these other engines popping up down Kentucky, Tennessee, um, Albuquerque, New Mexico, uh, that you'll see another resurgence. I think we're right on the cusp of that again, and the bigger railroads starting loosening up. So I don't know that we'll see it again in the next 3, 4, or 5 years, but we could see something take place in maybe 8 to 10 years, and get to gather up 3, 4 of the big mainline engines, some of the other smaller engines, and then bring in all the other aspects of railroading that we try to encompass, from model trains to just everything, every gauge possible, from N scale all the way up to full size. So we try to encompass everything, and it worked for us.
Hopefully, when the cycle comes back around, there'll be a brand new T1 that could join the party.
That would be an amazing addition to it. With some of the stuff going on down in Kentucky, with and Tennessee, those all have friendly. The big key to it is having a friendly host railroad to do the event on. You always have the challenges of getting the equipment to the venue, but the key is to have a good venue that you can offer all day excursions for some of the big engines. You can put a lot of people on, having shorter trips for mom, dad, and the young kids to come out. You need to hit a little bit of everything, and then the event's got to be tailored towards the general public, not necessarily towards rail fans. And that's kind of the little secret sauce to the whole thing is rail fans make up about 10% of the people actually buying the tickets. So you need to really make sure that the event's tailored towards the 90% of people that are buying tickets to make it happen.
I was reflecting on it 5 years ago on the 5-year anniversary. I did a blog post about it, and I used the term the rock and roll Woodstock kind of nature of it. You highlight that with the mentality of catering to all of these different audiences. I remember being there and seeing everything from models to the big stuff. You had children's entertainers like the St. James Coffee. I think that was a really good way to build in all these different elements, get the mainstream press going for it. And you had something like 30,000 people attend over the 4 days. It was pretty impressive as far as the attendance was concerned.
Yeah, I think we had about 35,000, and it was 103, 104 degrees in the middle of Rock Island on the Mississippi River there. It was brutal, if you remember. And so people still came out, still rode trains, and had a great time. I mean, a week doesn't go by that people reflect on it and wish we could do it again. But you got to get all the stars line up to make that happen, and they're just not lining right at the moment.
As you say, like the weather in certain areas of the country, it could change at any given moment. Let's look at the T1. How did the T1 Trust form?
Small group of individuals, really from around the country, that had interest in the building a mainline engine. They saw what was going on in the UK with the A1 Peppercorn 462 that was built from scratch, and how that was done, and they were intrigued by it, and they were more rail fans that kind of started out and say, hey, let's try to make this happen, and let's do that. And they kind of just banded together and started at about 2015, somewhere about that time, and it just it's kind of morphed from there and grown.
How did you become involved with the project?
Interesting enough, they'd done the Keystone, and we're still trying to do some other fundraising. The group really hadn't done much. And the funny thing about it is, all the way back in the 90s, people that knew me knew that I used to joke about it. Everybody wanted to build a New York Central Hudson, and I always made the joke, if I ever built an engine, it'd be a Penske T1. Everybody'd laugh about it, and we'd all, including myself, would joke about that. Who would, have in the right mind would build a mainline big T1 locomotive? I mean, that was kind of a crazy thing. So here, group pop online. And other groups over the years have popped up to build Hudsons, and they died as soon as they popped up. I mean, it's quite a task. This group seemed to be very well organized, getting all the drawings. So I was intrigued. So I kind of just stayed in the background, kind of watched them, made some donations, and for about a year and a half. And then I finally contacted them and said, you guys want to be really taken serious by the rail fan community and people that want to give donations. You need to do something big. And anybody knows me knows I don't go small. You got to go big or go. I don't even say no, not even go big or go home. Go big or go bigger. Is kind of the mantra. So I said, there's this tender sitting up in New York State. It's not 100% a T1 tender, but it's pretty close. It's 95% there. Came off of the J1, but as close as you're going to get. And to build that tender would be about a $3 million price tag. I said we could wipe $3 million off that $10 million estimate to build this thing right off the bat if we were able to buy this tender for the group or get it donated. They basically said, yeah, that's great. Sounds good. And then that was, so I was pretty adamant about it and stayed after them. I said, no, seriously, you guys got. So they finally had a conversation with Brad Noble, the chairman of the group that started it. And we got talking, and they were a little further along than what I had thought. And I had contacts that they didn't have that we could make this thing happen. So we kind of just agreed to try to work together on this. And I went up and met with the folks in New York, and I think I made 4 or 5 trips to board meetings and finally convinced them to sell it to us that we were a legitimate group. And we were off to the races. And in the meantime, we were making casting of dry wheels and a lot of other components, building cab, prow. I mean, a lot of other parts were going on at that same time. But that's kind of how I got involved in it. And basically, just want to be part of it and make it happen.
It is a monumental task and is evidenced by your own initial views of the concept of it way back in the day and having evolved into the mindset of, no, I think we could actually do this. Some of the line of questioning that has existed throughout is to the extent that you now have an FAQ on the website, but I'd be interested to explore that a little bit more with you. So I suppose one of the first questions that comes up when people learn more about this is, with so many pre-existing steam engines out there that are saved, quote unquote, but would need substantial financial contributions to get into operation, why focus on a completely new build?
Well, it all comes down to personal preference. It's if a group popped up and wanted to restore the Mohawk in Elkhart, Indiana, we'd be all supportive of that. We have no problem with that. Or what other locomotive that's out there? That's everybody's personal preference. We're a group of Pensy fans that really would like to see this missing piece of the Pensy collection that's at Strasburg recreated. There's so many things about this locomotive that, there's so many legends and rumors about the locomotive. Most of them have been disproved, but those rumors all still live on about it. And we just want to disprove many of those or prove them if that's the case. I don't think anybody have any issue with that one way or another. So it's a personal preference. When it comes down to it, we're a group that really appreciates that technology. I mean, this locomotive pretty much had every modern piece of technology put on at the end, and it just wasn't really given its time to shine because the Pensy tried to cancel this order of the T1s in lieu of buying diesel locomotives. So they had already made the shift mentally and culturally within the Pennsylvania Railroad in the late 40s, and so these really weren't put to the true test.
You mentioned in that the Mohawk, and a lot of times when people think about the great lost steam engines, another one that comes up a lot of the time is the New York Central J3A Hudsons. It sounds like a primary motivator for you guys is the fact that you're Pensy fans. Was there ever a point at which anyone in your team was looking at the Hudson as a potential project. It seems like this idea of proving the Pensy technology is this fundamental drive for your group.
The thing about that is we hear the Hudson thing come up every time. We have no problem. If a legitimate group came up and said they wanted to do a Hudson, we would give them all our resources and help them out every which way we can. Ultimately, we're Steam fans first and foremost. So with that, I mean, somebody came along and legitimately had some funding in place or wanting to put in the sweat equity that we've had to put in over the last several years, we would fully support that. We'll go on record saying that there's no ill will. It'll be, I'd like to see it as like 21st century version of it, but whatever. Because I'd love to pull up next to a J3A and have them side by side. So like I said, I got no issue there whatsoever. As far as within a group of talking about building, not really. I mean, we're a group of Pensy loving Steam fans when it comes down to it, but we're also, a lot of us are mechanical engineers. So the mechanics of the T1 are significantly different than the Hudson. So the Hudson out there running is not much different than, mechanically than say 611 or 765, or even, like 844. So it's mechanically the same, where the T1 differs from that. So there's so many things more unique about the T1 than the Hudson. Not that I'm say anything bad about Hudson, but that's just one of our driving forces behind it.
There are 464s in existence. There are ones that have operated in excursion service, and some still do, as opposed to a 4444 that nobody has running. When you talk about sharing resources, Jake Abel asks, will there be cross-pollination for operation between 1361 and the T1 Trust, i.e., will we see any equipment used commonly between both groups? I'm going to extend Jake's question to ask, is there a sharing of resources even in the construction phase?
Yes, and maybe. So I want to answer your second part first, and that is in the construction phase. So FMW, that Solutions, who is tasked with rebuilding the K4 on behalf of the museum over there, is also one of our corporate sponsors, and it has been very valuable resource to the T1 Trust and helping our boiler design construction through this whole process. We've been working with them for the last several years. They've been amazing to work with, and fully support them and their what they're doing over there in Altoona. So we are working with them on some of the things that they're talking about on the K4 that they're going to do on that we will probably piggyback off of with the T1 when the time comes. I'm not going to spoil some of those things right at the moment. I'll let them break that news when that comes out. But in the meantime, the short answer is yes. So we can save the K4 by combining some of those resources. We can save the guys in Altoona money, and we save ourselves money, not by duplicating engineering costs. So there's some things there. And fortunately, because the work they've done on the T1 boiler and designing it and converting it over from a riveted boiler to an all welded boiler, that's helped them in their calculation designs to redo the boiler of the 1361 directly. So there's been some direct stuff from the T1 that will actually rolls over to the K4. So we're pleased to help them with that indirectly. That was never intended, but it worked out for both organizations well there. As far as sharing resources, equipment, stuff, there's no real talk about it. We, at this stage of the game, we're not really focused on ancillary equipment, any passenger cars or tool cars or auxiliary tenders or anything of that nature. We will focus on building the engine. When that time comes, I'm pretty confident that we'll be able to work together and do something. I mean, how cool would it be to have both engines together at some point? So we don't have any short-term plans just because of the nature of railroading. As I talked at the top of this, how it changes on a 3 to 5 year basis just on management. So you can't really plan for too far in advance. So, so we will. I'm certain do something as we're both running at the same time.
The Age of Steam Roundhouse, a true treasure of railroad preservation in Sugar Creek, Ohio, continues to make great strides with a number of unique restoration projects. Right now, on their website, ageofsteamroundhouse.org, you can read their roundhouse reports to see the ongoing restoration to operation of Eureka Western number 19, the locomotive featured in the film Emperor of the North, 2 passenger cars, and the completion of Moorhead and North Fork number 12. To plan your visit and experience tours and special events, check out their website at ageofsteamroundhouse.org and follow them on social media. There's an old adage that goes, how do you eat an elephant? And the answer is one bite at a time. Tackling a locomotive like this, undoubtedly there's an element of that in place. And what's been interesting to see evolve is how you've treated it with that mindset with regards to your fundraising and your updates. You have these illustrations that show which parts are next to be fabricated, what your fundraising is focusing on part-wise. So it's not that huge sticker price of, last I'd seen 7 million. Feel free to correct me if that's been adjusted. But you're looking at, this is how much we need to make a drive wheel, and this is how much we need to make the boiler, and so forth. KR Huff asks, what are the plans to make the thousands of small parts needed? And why was the boiler chosen to be the first item made when it was one of the easier parts?
Well, I don't think the boiler is easy by any stretch of imagination. If anybody's seen our videos of what we're having to do to heat and beat 1-inch thick steel plates into place over steel dies, there's nothing easy about that constructing the boiler, or cheap. So with that, it's all about your adage of the eating an elephant is perfect. And that's what we're doing. If we went out and asked a fundraising drive to raise $1 million, we'd probably raise $2,000. People don't get excited about that. It's too big. So if you're asking, so we need to break that down into smaller bites. So now, okay, I see where my money's going. I'm donating money, and then it's going to be spending to a firebox, a side sheet, or a stable, or a mud ring, or whatever the case may be. People can relate to that easier than it can to this huge, the whole boiler in itself. So that's why it was broken up. We've chosen, if you've noticed along the way, we've chosen things that are recognizable, are complicated, but have value to the project. So, for instance, like the driver, when we chose the driver, no one's done a box spoke driver in 70 years. We were the first ones to have to figure out the engineering, and there was a lot to. It's one of those projects. If you knew what it was going to be when you got into it, you probably wouldn't have jumped into it. But we were into it and did it. Got some great partners in it, and figured it out, because that wheel is hollow inside, which if people have seen it in person, they have a new respect for it. And then items like the cab. The cab being completed, the prow, which is the face of the locomotive, are some of the bigger items. Now, we have done hundreds of smaller items for the locomotive, pins and bushings, washout plugs. A lot of things have been machined. They're just not sexy or exciting that people get too thrilled about, but they're all parts of it. So we continue to chip away at those things, and we, each month make more and more of the smaller parts that most people don't see or really even care about. But they want to see big stuff. They want to see that we're actually making progress. So if we I said not if, but when we complete the boiler on there, that and with a smoke box on it, that thing's 60 feet long. It's I mean, it is massive. It is very difficult to put in words just how big this boiler is. So the boiler is only 1 foot shorter than the Union Pacific Big Boys boiler that it's running around the country with right now. So to put it in some kind of a perspective of how big and powerful this thing is, uh, we want to be able to take that boiler, put the cab on it, take it on the road, and take it around maybe as early as next year, and take it to some of these events, and let the people, let our supporters see it, and feel it, touch it, and get an idea of just what it is that we're doing. Um, that makes it real, and that's why we chose the boiler.
Looking at your fundraising for September of 2021 right now, one of the options on your website is for $500, you can have your name or somebody's name cast into one of the drivers, which strikes me as a great way to be able to, if you're a Penzi fan, contribute to this thing and have a visible sign that you contributed to it, but isn't taking away from the aesthetic of the locomotive as a whole.
Yeah, we have lots of things on our website. One of the real popular ones is the drawings. We have hundreds of drawings still available. We've had thousands already sponsored, and you can sponsor a drawing for like $10, $15. It all depends on the drawing, the size, and they run different prices. But so we've got these drawings. They've been all scanned in and redrawn in AutoCAD from it. So then basically, if somebody just wants to spend 10 or $15 to help support the project, they can do that, and then you can take it all the way up to a $20,000 or $30,000 sponsor for a larger part. So we have everything in between. There's no real excuse if somebody wants to see the project go to not make a donation in that case, because we literally move at the speed of donations. So that's the biggest thing driving us right now.
Eric Fader asks, how are new technologies, if any, being integrated into the design?
Let me ask you about some clarification on that question. As far as using newer technologies to manufacture the locomotive, or using newer technologies incorporated in the locomotive when operational?
I'm going to speculate he's asking if you're updating the design of the T1 to incorporate 21st century railroading elements, because undoubtedly you guys are using new construction methods, CNC technology and so forth. So more looking at what's in the steam locomotive itself.
First primary goal is not to make any modifications that would greatly change the outward appearance of the locomotive, but ultimately we want something that will make it feasible for mainline operation. So, and I'm sure I'm going to miss some things and probably get questions later, but some of those items includes something obviously as simple as adjusters on the third and fourth drivers to help it get around a little bit looser curves, so we can move around tighter curves, I should say, on that. So when our engineering shows this thing anywhere 611 or 765 can go, this thing should be able to go around those same curvatures. So that is the first goal. We need to be able to make sure this thing can go around the railroad. So that's, if you can get an SD40 somewhere, most likely this will fit as well. So axle loading is a different thing. Has to work with engineering. Nothing we can really do about that. We're not going to make the thing any lighter. We're going to try to maintain the same axle loading as built, but curvature is always a big thing. If you have to get into a Y to turn it, you just don't have any turntables to turn this thing. So that's one area that we'll make adjustments. We'll probably have some sort of slip monitoring system to let you know if one or both of the wheels. Typically, it was, I believe, the front engine would slip more often, and that was just a weight distribution. And we can see it in our CAD model where the center of gravity is in the locomotive. It's more above the front wheel on the rear set of engine on them. So they obviously didn't have that technology in 40, 42 when this thing was designed. So they wouldn't have known exactly what the center of gravity was, like we can duplicate in the computer. So, and then of course, the big question we always get is PTC, cab signals, all that stuff. The short answer is yes. This year, the big boy obviously showed that PTC is compatible on steam locomotives, can be used. So the fortunate thing is that we're several years away from operating. So in that time, groups like the 261, 765, the boys in Albuquerque will get it perfected for us. And then we'll just ride their coattails on what that needs to look like. There'll be so that's the big question we get all the time. Well, it have PTC. Well, if we were on a main line, yes, that the answer is on that. We will not ask the railroads to change their requirements for us. We will work to modify what we have to do to meet their requirements. So to make it easier for them.
Austin Poole wonders, what are the plans of going about making the frame and cylinder castings for the locomotive, since the original was one solid piece?
Another question we get asked all the time. We're currently working on that right now, that engineering, so that that can be wrapped up here really in the next couple months, and have that ready to start fabrication. Right now, we're and I say this, and don't hold me to this, we're leaning towards casting the cylinder sections either as one piece or two halves each, and then the rest of the frame will all be a weldment, be welded sections or steel sections welded together. And then once completed, the whole thing will be put into a very large oven, heat up to about 1100 degrees, and stress relieved. So as far as that whole frame would consider it to be homogeneous, that it doesn't even know that it's welded together. So by removing all the stress out of it. So essentially it would become just like a one-piece casting, but we're just going to have to weld it together. We have found 3 foundries that will cast it as one piece. They pretty much all 3 said the same thing, that they would want at least 3 tries to pour it to get it perfect, so that there's no voids in the pour. And you're looking at roughly $1 million per pour. So we'd be around $3 million for a one-piece casting frame. We still have to machine and do a lot of things too. So we can build it for probably around $1 million. The frame, as I described here previously. So, and we have much more control over the whole process as we're going. So that's the way we're leaning towards manufacturing it. And we have found a vendor. We're not ready to share that yet, but we have found a vendor to do that construction.
Grant Geist asks, where will all the components be gathered and final assembly take place?
We have 3 different locations of organizations that have reached out to us about erecting it at their facility. We have not made a decision at this stage of the game. We have not had to yet. So it's probably a little premature at this phase. But it will be either Ohio or Pennsylvania. So I'll narrow it down for the folks playing that guessing game. But the 3 different locations are between those 2 states on where we're at there. So, and those are central to be where we would be operating in the first years.
Looking at the fact that you mentioned at the start of the episode that some of this inspiration for everything we're talking about came from the A1 Trust, the A1 Peppercorn Steam Locomotive Tornado that was built in the UK over a decade. When you, Jason, look at the history of that project and what they went through, obviously a very different steam locomotive from what you're building, different loading gauge, different country. But what are the takeaway points that you see, both from its construction history as well as its operating history, that you feel are relevant to what you're doing here with this project that you take to heart?
we've talked quite a bit with those guys and had a lot of heart to heart, and find out what's worked well for them, what hasn't worked well for them, what they'd recommend if they, and obviously they did it again because they did the P2 Mikado, the same group, after they got done with that, and they're making really good progress on it. The A1 took them about 18 years from start to finish till it was completed. So one of the biggest things we get from them is you just don't give up. It's persistence over it. And that's the hard thing for a lot of people in today's world, in today's society. Everything's immediate gratification. You order something on Amazon, you have it tomorrow. It's everything's immediate gratification. Well, this is not by any means immediate gratification. I think we're moving along much further than and faster than the A1 group did. But one of the things, talking to Mark and the guys over there, that really came out of it, they couldn't get any fundraising for their tender. So that was one thing that really pushed us to go get our tender. Everybody wants to help donate towards a big driving wheel, a boiler, a frame, parts of the locomotive that are exciting, and but yeah, a tender is just kind of there. And so to try to raise that kind of money to build a tender is pretty asinine, very difficult to do. So we took that portion out of the equation pretty early on. So then now we can focus on the locomotive portion, the sexier part of the operation, as many would say, for donors, people that are willing to open their wallets for us. So so that's the big thing of it, and the persistence of it. You just got to stay after it. Little donations on monthly reoccurring are huge. It's still probably our single biggest contribution, definitely on a monthly basis. We have a lot of people donating anywhere from 10 to 50 to $75 every month to our project. So that helps us budget every month what we can spend on different parts, components, and different things we can order. So, because if a group like in Nashville is ordering a bunch of castings for fire doors, we need to be in a position to shell out $2,000-3,000 to buy those, because if we were to do those later on and have the patterns made and do all the work they've already done, it would cost us 3 times that much money. So we have to be in a position when opportunities like that come up with different organizations around the country that we can seize on that and really take advantage of it.
The Strasburg Railroad is an institution in the heritage railroad industry, and its mechanical services department is proud to lead the way. With the knowledge and experience that has created one of the most reliable steam railroading experiences in the country, the Strasburg Railroad is excited to offer their expertise to the rest of the industry. Strasburg's professional team provides consulting and technical assistance to take your steam locomotive or railcar project from idea to finished product. They stand behind their work and always strive to meet their customers' needs for quality, historic accuracy, and reliability at a price that is fair. Unlike many competitors, they feature a fully equipped boiler, railcar, and machine shop, so the work gets done in-house, helping you to get more for your money. Send your inquiries to mechanical@strasburgrailroad.com and let the professionals get to work for you. From the UK, Chris Eden Green asks, is the 140 mile per hour statement on the Trust's homepage just a bit of whimsical hyperbole, or is it a serious goal?
That's the yeah, absolutely. We'd love to hit that, and it's always good to have goals. If we hit 138, I think we'd all be pretty happy. But ultimately, we know the locomotive did it on a regular basis. We have the timetable reports. There's nobody has read the information on the locomotive really questions the ability did it go 130 mile an hour almost pretty much daily, especially on the racetrack out going towards Fort Wayne. So there's really, I mean, there's so much paperwork that supports that, even from Franklin that did the oscillating poppet valves, and that have a extreme amount of data backing up the speeds on there. So it was just never officially done. They didn't really care back then. They wanted to get to Chicago as fast as they can to beat New York Central. That's really what it came down to. They took F units off, put the T1s on there, Columbus, Pittsburgh, where it may be, and ran as fast as they could to get to Chicago. That was the name of the game on it to beat the 21st century there. And that's all they were thinking about. They weren't thinking about any kind of Guinness Book of World Records or anything of that nature or UK records. They were just worried about getting to Chicago the fastest. And that's what, pushed that. So we'll prove that. That's an exciting thing that we've already had a sponsor willing to step up and pay the fee for Pueblo test grounds to send us out there. So, and it's a legitimate group that will pay it, and they will make it happen if that's the case. We just have to finish the locomotive when it comes down to it, and if we got to put it on a flat car all the way out to Colorado, we'll do that to make this happen. But we got to focus on finishing it first, and because there's really nowhere else. We get this question: where are you going to do it? And Northeast quarter isn't an option. Michigan, 110 mile an hour is a max up there on that section of track out of Michigan City and Kalamazoo. There's just not a whole lot in the East that any railroad would allow us to do it. I mean, we got to be realistic about this. We can't go to a railroad and say, hey, we want to run our steam locomotive at 130 mile an hour. They'd still be laughing. But the FRA test track out in Pueblo, Colorado is a whole different animal. You can pay to test out there. That's where Alstrom and everybody else tests their high-speed train sets. That's set up for it out there. So it's all private. There's no crossings. So that's where it's going to be done. But they have a current a testing fee starts at around $250,000. So you have to really be serious about it to step up and make that happen.
The tender was a stroke of good fortune in that you were able to acquire it, and certainly that made the whole project easier. Are there challenges that were unforeseen that have been difficult to overcome or that you've managed to overcome that are going to help you going forward now that you've solved that particular issue?
I mean, we run into challenges and problems every day on this build. And we have to approach them in an engineering mindset using a scientific method to push through it. We're pretty confident if they can do this in the 1940s on paper and slide rule, there's no reason we can't do it. I mean, and that's really when it comes down to, yes, there will be challenges. There'll be things that we'll have to figure out along the way. But there's nothing that we see, and we've been over this thing top to bottom, front to back many times, that really has any concern to us on the abilities. The people that are involved in this do this stuff every day and see these things every day. And there's a level of confidence that is reassuring when you start looking at problems.
Bill Didden asks, as of now, what railroads have interest in hosting 5550 excursion trains?
Oh, geez. I don't have my sheet in front of me. It is on our website under the FAQ there. We have letters on there showing support. Places like Steamtown, Cuyahoga Valley, the Steam Railroading Institute up in Michigan, several of the short lines, escaping me right now, down in the Carolinas that have welcomed us there. The boys down in Tennessee and Kentucky. So there's opportunities out there. We really haven't even gone out and solicited. Our main thought process is, again, it kind of gets back into what I talked about before with railroad management changing every 3 to 5 years, that it's kind of premature if we go out there, and we're not going to go approach a class one or anything of that nature at this time. That would be a complete waste of our time. We need to be focusing on fundraising and building, and not going around. We're confident as long as locomotives like 611, 765, the 576 in Nashville, all those, the 2716, all those will be running here in the next couple of years. We'll have no problem finding a place as well. So, and may we all get together one place at some point and have that train festival you talked about the top of this. So that would be an excellent opportunity, and we'd be all for it.
Because this is such a large engine, it's always going to be something, once fully constructed, of course, that will need to be transported by rail on special moves. And because the class ones are what they are, sometimes they will be amenable to that and sometimes they won't. But anytime it's a matter of getting it from one place to another, that's always going to be a key factor. If this thing is built and completed at a time when there isn't that type of relationship, so it is limited to maybe just one place it can run because it is at the moment isolated, or maybe it's at a place where all it can be is steamed up on display, would you still count that as a particular success?
Absolutely. I look at completing locomotive as a success in itself, because you may have 1, 2, 3 bad years. I mean, you look at Fort Wayne didn't run 765 at all last year with COVID. So, but now they're out running again this year. It's kind of the same thought process there. Will we have good years and will we have bad years? And when I say good and bad years, I mean amount of time running. Yes, because that's what everybody does. That's kind of getting the cyclical nature that I talked about at the top of this. I've been around 27 years. I've been involved in restoration, 11 different steam locomotives around the country. And I've seen this come and go, this whole nature of the industry. So I have the utmost confidence if it's completed, it will have somewhere to run. Somebody will always welcome it. So say it's doing just what 765 is doing, going back and forth over 25 mile long rail line somewhere and hauling thousands of passengers each year, then hey, I count that as a success. The realistic nature of it is most excursions will probably be 40 mile an hour or less. There probably won't be a whole lot of high speed excursions behind the T1. As much as I'd like to make that happen, I have to be realistic in showing what's out there. You really have Amtrak as an option, and right now they are not an option for doing steam excursions like they were, 10 years ago. So that rules that out. And so but 10 years from now, that might be an option again. So we want to be in a position to maximize that opportunity when it comes up. So we have to get it running first, get it tested, get it broke in, and make sure that everything's working as designed. And then we're ready to approach them and do more exciting things. But it's you got to kind of crawl before you run here.
I recall some time back reading something where 2030 was being thrown around as a potential completion date. If you had all of the money that you needed today, everything was there and there weren't going to be any financial spread. If you knew you had every single penny you needed, how long would it take to complete?
3 years.
3 years?
3 years. So from this point where I'm at right now, and I had the money and the resources, I could have this thing running in 3 years. I don't think it'd be any faster, just because of I understand how the vendors in the industry work. There's only one vendor that does tires for these things. There's only one vendor that does this, one does that. So you're very limited on stuff like that. So there's an order of operations to put this whole thing together, and you just can't. You couldn't put this thing together in 6 months, a year. It would be 2.5 to 3 years. Best case scenario if I had all the money in the bank right now, and that's just the realistic situation. So basically by 2025, we'd be done 5 years quicker than what we're calling on our website. I won't go into detail on like how we come up with that 2030. We got it laid out pretty well on our website, using the P1 group, their process that they did, how long it took them, and then multitude of other factors in there. So we feel we researched that pretty well and have a pretty good grasp on that. And we feel we're probably we know that we are ahead of our our original schedule at this stage of the game. So we're feeling pretty good about that.
Given that that date is still a number of years off as of where we are at right now in 2021, what keeps you personally motivated, and what helps to keep your team motivated for that very long haul goal?
Things like this boiler, the video and pictures we're currently putting out from where the boiler stands right now, you see all this hard work and everything coming together. That makes it worth it. And that keeps the fire lit underneath you to keep going when you see stuff like that. So when we take this boiler on the road to around the country and, have the cab on it and showing this thing off, all painted up, I think it's going to really light a fire under a lot of donors, a lot of people that said we couldn't do this, that we were crazy. And we are not, I'll go on the record, we are not questioning. We know we are crazy. There's no question about that. No sane person would try to do what we're doing. But we feel that we are a controlled crazy in the fact that we are taking an engineering scientific methodology approach to making this thing happen.
I think it's, as you said, that so much of rail preservation is a matter of preference in terms of the projects that people choose, whether they be restorations, scrap saves, or in this case, building something completely new. And that motivates us both in terms of what we contribute our time to as well as what we contribute our money to. But the fact that here you are, it's still 5 years, 6 years after you initially began this, and you're still very much on this path of we will get this done, potentially a third of the way through the process, depending on how you look at it, that does say something. And it's good to see that you recognize the audacity of the goal that you're going for, but that you're still willing to achieve that.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, you have to. We knew going into this, it wasn't going to be quick and easy. This was a long-term project. A lot of groups get into restoring a steam locomotive and think it's going to be 2 or 3 years to get it back to operation, or something that's a year, and then here it turns into, you ask the guys up in Michigan with 1225, that was a 15-20 year battle. I mean, I can go on. Almost every locomotive was in that situation, turned into a long restoration battle. So we didn't have any illusions of grandeur that this thing was going to be 3 years and done. We walked in a long haul knowing this is a 15-year project for the time we started, and we're well on our way to making that happen. So, that's the reality of the situation, and we're fine with it. And we started out with a lot of people telling us that naysayers that say there's no way we're going to do this, and now every time we post something new online or send something out or go to another show, people come up to us and say, we didn't believe you could do this, but our minds kind of changed. I think you're going to make this happen now. And so we're starting to see that shift, and that's very positive, and that's uplifting for the group as well.
Their website is prrt1steamlocomotivetrust.org. You can learn more details about what they have going on, keep up to date with the specifics of what piece of the elephant that they're taking on at this point in time. Jason, thank you so much for joining us here on the Roundhouse and sharing with us a bit of the history of the project, some of the details of what's going on and what you're looking forward to accomplishing in the future.
All right, Nick. Hey, thank you for having us.
And now, the question of the day.
Last time on the Roundhouse for episode 111, we visited Norfolk and Western 611. That was kind of a funny coincidence. as it was at the Strasburg Railroad, which was a very fun event. I encourage you to check out the episode if you haven't already. It led to me asking you guys, what guest mainline steam locomotive would you like to appear at Strasburg Railroad? Grant Geist writes, Fort Wayne Railroad Historical Society and 765 are celebrating their 50th anniversary in 2022. Just saying. Well, actually, a lot of people were just saying 765. That one came up a lot. Shane McNeil writes, not mainline, but a 7470 7312 reunion would be sweet. That's referring to the fact that Strasburg has Canadian National number 7312, and 7470 is a former Canadian National steam locomotive at Conway Scenic Railroad. That would be a cool reunion. I'd totally go for that. And the fact that Strasburg has number 89, which is also Canadian National. Joe Mazzino Northrop writes, not necessarily mainline, but a 9060 reunion would be pretty sweet. You guys were pretty creative with these. I'll give you that. 60 being Black River and Western number 60, a former Great Western Railroad locomotive of Colorado, of which 90 was as well. Side note, very hard to find information about the Great Western Railway of Colorado because Great Western Railway tends to come up with a different Great Western Railway. Lastly, Jimmy Lambert writes, I will echo the sentiments regarding Nickel Plate Road 765 and Great Western 60. However, I would be quite enthusiastic to see any mainline performer or short line locomotive that sees limited service pay the Road to Paradise a visit. The 611 event at Strasburg may not work the locomotive to its limits like 20 cars on the main line will, but it's very special as you can safely get up close and personal with the locomotive in ways that aren't possible out on the high iron. Jimmy, you absolutely nailed it. I agree with you 100%. As much as 611 on the main line is a treat, it was kind of nice to go and visit it when it wasn't swamped with crowds, when it wasn't a very chaotic environment. I think it gave me a new appreciation for the locomotive that mainline steam, it just has a very different feel to it. You hit the nail on the head there. Your question of the day for this episode is, what locomotive would you build from scratch? Would you be building a steam locomotive, a diesel, maybe even an electric? Let me know on the roundhousepodcast.com. Links to social media are there. Thank you guys for listening. It's been great 2021. We've had some great episodes. Year's not done. We've got a couple of great ones coming up this year, but I'm looking back at what we've done. It's been fun. 2022 is also going to be pretty awesome. I've got some great things to share with you in the not too distant future. And really, it's just great to have you along for the journey. Thank you so much for being part of this podcast. As we like to say here, the Roundhouse is our house.